attest to both of them being delicious. We are going to hear now from Helen Rortvedt again, who works with NOFA, and she was in last week or 2 weeks ago. Last week. Hard
Yep.
passage of time and all that. Yeah, talking to us about the local purchasing incentive that we have had for the last couple of years in place that gives schools who purchase local foods, if they purchase enough of them, after getting through a first year of the program, they can get either 15 or 20 or 25 cents based on what percentage of their purchases are local. And I think it was the day that we had a lot of people, one of those days where we had a lot of people scheduled in a brief, not long enough block of time. So we wanted to have back and maybe address some of the questions that have come up in the meantime about the program as it currently exists, or maybe questions that we all had about ways to possibly change it. So without further ado, if you want to come up to the table, Helen,
Sure.
And you can just identify yourself for the record, and you remember all of us since we already introduced ourselves, so we'll just have you launch right in.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you for having me back. For the record, my name is Helen Rortvedt, and I am the Farm to School and Food Access Programs Director at NOFA Vermont. And as a reminder, together with our partners at Shelburne Farms, we run the Vermont Feed Project, which is a statewide farm to school project. So I'll spare you, rereading my testimony from last week. But my hope was just to come back and speak to any questions that may have come up around the local foods incentive. I'm not sure if it would be helpful to do a quick overview refresher, or if you all are ready to dive back in. I'll leave that up to the committee.
Well, I'm not sure that everybody was here that day, and just because we are, it might be helpful.
Okay.
Very quick.
Fantastic. So I'll do my best to be brief. I can get into the weeds here quickly, so please feel free to pull me out.
For about half an hour.
About half an hour, perfect. So the Local Foods Incentive Program, you did hear, for those of you who were here last Wednesday for Farm to School Awareness Day, you heard from Connor Floyd, the grants manager at the Agency of Education, which is the Child Nutrition Programs team who administers this grant. It was established in Act 67 of 2021. And the Local Foods Incentive Program is designed to incentivize public schools to purchase more Vermont foods. So Vermont schools spend about $20 million, a little over $20 million last school year on food. And we would love to see as much of that money circulating amidst our own farmers and our own agricultural community as possible. So what this grant does is it incentivizes schools by offering them a per plate additional payment if they achieve a certain level of local purchasing. So schools that add up all their local purchasing and determine they've achieved 15% will receive 15 cents per lunch served, and it's retroactive looking back at the previous school year. And if they achieve 20% local purchasing, they'll receive an additional 20 cents per plate per lunch served, not for both meals. And then the highest tier currently is 25% local purchasing for 25 cents per lunch. The program is really designed to be an incentive. There are a number of these types of programs in states popping up around the country. And the program here in Vermont is sort of loosely modeled off of an incentive-based model that New York State has been working with for several years. I cannot remember exactly the year that it started, but they had 4 or 5 years of experience before we did. We learned a lot from them in designing our program as well. But the idea was to really incentivize schools to push themselves rather than a simple reimbursement model, which some other states have employed with some success, where they could just submit their receipts for local purchases and get a percentage or a full reimbursement, whatever the program is. This model was really designed to get schools to break out of their current purchasing habits and to push them into reach to expand their local purchasing. So that first tier, that 15%, is a bit of a difficult bar to reach for some school districts, and there's others, as you perhaps witnessed last week, that have been really successful. Those are school districts often that have been making an investment in local purchasing for several years. So they had some systems and relationships in place already to capitalize on the program. So I think I'll maybe stop there because I could just go on and on and on and open it up to any questions. But perhaps, are there any clarifying questions about how the incentive program is working?
Yeah, that's probably a good place to start with questions. How it actually functions right now, the way we're looking.
Yeah.
Any questions about that? Yes, Representative Levitt.
I'm just curious, I've been talking to some folks in Grand Isle County and some schools participate and some schools don't.
Right.
And they're all in the same school district.
Yeah.
Can schools sort of work better together? And if so, can you speak to what that might look like?
Yeah, certainly. So the way the program exists right now is it's administered at what we call the SFA level, the School Food Authority. And in most cases, that school food authority is equivalent to the supervisory union.
Okay.
In some cases where there is no supervisory union, it's equivalent to the school district. So it's a little complicated, but it's at that SFA level. So for SFAs for which they have a centralized food service program where they typically would have one manager that oversees, hiring and training and purchasing and everything for the entire SFA. This model works really well for them. For schools, individual schools that are part of an SFA, but maybe have their own independently managed program where they don't necessarily work with their colleague in another school within their same district
Right.
to do purchasing together or things like that. This program can be a little bit more cumbersome. Those relationships don't necessarily exist from one school to the next, even though they share an SFA, if that makes any sense. There's also a number of instances within the state where there are a few schools or districts within an SFA that contract with the food service management company, such as the Abbey Group or others. And then there may be one or two or more schools that operate their meal program independently, but they all share and are all part of the same SFA. So they have the same business office that they file all their claims through, if that makes any sense. So it's just there's a lot of different scenarios. And this program works well for some, and it's a little bit more challenging. And there's another layer of communication and coordination that needs to happen in some of those instances, like in Grand Isle Supervisory Union.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And where does how is the percentage measured then in a situation like that? Is it 15% of the SFAs?
Correct. Yes, it would be 15% of the way the program is currently administered and the way the statute reads it is 15% of the SFA. So you could have a situation where there's one school within the SFA that just really does a great job and maybe they get to 25% local purchasing, and that can then help bring up the numbers for some of the other schools within the SFA that are not quite that high. And again, that brings up a different set of challenges if they're willing to create that support for the other programs in the SFA. Of course, that's wonderful. And there are some situations where it just isn't logistically possible for that to happen. So.
But again, just following through that scenario,
Yeah.
one district or school might be really working hard to achieve 25%.
Yeah.
But if the other districts or the other schools aren't participating at all,
It's a deterrent.
and the first school might get nothing because overall the percentage falls below 15.
That's correct. That's
Potentially.
potentially, yes, exactly. And we are aware of a number of schools, individual schools that have significant interest in the program, but they are embedded within an SFA where the other schools just either aren't ready for it, don't have the capacity, they're dealing with other bigger challenges like staffing and other things. So there's a whole host of reasons why schools aren't able to participate yet. And this is one of those layers of challenge, I think, that we're running into on the ground. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, other questions? Representative Rice?
I know that when Act 67 passed, there was the language saying that it was our goal to get to 20%
Yeah.
in 2023. I don't know the background of what what went into setting that goal. But I'm just wondering if there is an accurate measurement of where we actually are statewide.
Yeah, excellent question. And I wish I could say resoundingly, yes, we know exactly where we are with local purchasing and we're on track. We know we're not at 20% yet. One of the most wonderful things that has come out of the first couple of years of this grant is that schools are finally taking more care with tracking their local purchases. Previously, it had been a fair bit of guesswork. Some school districts and some school nutrition directors were very committed and very detailed, and others less so. There's many things on their plates. So adding another layer of complicated tracking without offering this sort of incentive or reward for doing so just simply wasn't in the cards. So we really were flying a little bit blind about how much of our now $20 million schools are spending was actually staying in the Vermont economy. As this program continues to grow and more schools become a part of it, we're going to be able to trust those numbers a lot more. So I wish I could say yes, but we're working on it. And this program has really been helping to get to the specific numbers.
Good, yeah, we've got, it's sort of the cart before the horse or the other way around, but we have later today, legislative councils coming in to have us look at the actual language in Act 67, which might have been helpful if we'd looked at that last week, but we are going to have that today.
Excellent.
We should all be very familiar with it by that point, but we'll be able to see the actual language and what Mike just mentioned, that where it refers to, it is the state's goal, just a goal, to get to 20% with. Other questions? Did you have a follow-up?
It's a separate question.
We'll come back to you in a second. And Representative Cole, did you have a question?
Sure. One big part of our discussion here with the potential passage of the universal school meals has been how to incorporate local and ensure that that's, not forgotten about, even though we're passing, or we're, it's a wonderful concept, but this is also a critical piece, is the local piece. And so we've been talking, here and there in small groups and everything about why Act 67 is separate and why it should be separate, or if it shouldn't be separate, how to incorporate a piece. And there's so many different moving parts and playing around with that with this upcoming legislation of universal school meals. And I'd just love to hear your perspective.
Yeah.
On why to keep them separate or how to distinguish that.
Yeah, and again, I'll speak, from my perspective personally and from within NOFA and Vermont Feed. So we have worked really closely with our peers at Hunger Free Vermont and elsewhere throughout the last, how many years now? 5, 6, 7 years we've been having these conversations, sort of seeding interest in both the local foods incentive, the local purchasing incentive, and universal meals, and really demonstrating how they work together along with the pre-existing farm to school grants program. We're really creating these 3 very supportive legs of the same stool to change our school food program for the better for all of our kids and make it work better for our farmers as well. So we, as a coalition of advocates and technical assistance providers and folks working in this world, have always thought about this and presented it as farm fresh school meals for all. We see them all as interconnected, and I believe you all have been shown the virtuous cycle graphic. Does that ring a bell? No. So we're all in this together. So this is not a pitting each other, universal meals versus the local foods incentive kind of thing by any stretch of the imagination. It's really exactly the opposite. I believe they've been separated purely for simplicity. The universal meals bill is complex and it had a longer pathway through the legislature. The local foods incentive program was a smaller investment, a smaller appropriation, and we had real energy and enthusiasm for that 2 years ago in 2021, and we found a way to get that piece through, but knowing that we're all still working together towards that same goal where we have universal school meals for all kids every single day, where they are fed healthy, scratch-cooked, Vermont-sourced, where possible, food, and where their schools also have access to the supportive farm-to-school grants programs as well. So it's all 3 programs are really designed to work together, but they have been separated in terms of the legislative process. So I don't know if that answers your question or not, but.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Representative Rice?
Yeah, so I've been just trying to chat with people in the
Sure.
schools in my district, and I heard anecdotally from one that their understanding, or that they've been led to believe that it was harder in certain corners of the state to do this kind of sourcing. Less affordable, less, harder to do it affordably, harder to fit it in. Whether that's a distribution piece, I'm not sure, but sort of if you could speak to
Sure.
whether that's truth or whether that's a myth that needs to be busted, whether things are coming along to make that less true.
Yeah. I think there are certain elements of truth to that. It is more challenging in some places to source products at an affordable price with the distribution and delivery needs that schools have. School nutrition directors don't have time to be running around to 25 different farms themselves as much as some of them may want to. They simply don't have that time. So delivery and also product specifications that meet their needs can be a challenge. So the way that a lot of schools are sourcing local, really there's three main channels. Schools have direct purchasing relationships with producers. Those tend to exist in all corners of the state. Everyone knows a maple producer in their community. A lot of times ground beef has been a direct purchase for school nutrition directors, simply because there's a limited amount of ground beef available that schools can afford. And so that tends to be a direct purchase relationship up till now, although that's slightly changing. And then the next level would be working with a local food hub. You met with Becca Perrin from Green Mountain Farm Direct up in the Northeast Kingdom last week, and then also Tom Bruton from Food Connects, which is based in Brattleboro. And between their two food hubs, they are able to serve quite a lot of the school districts. It doesn't mean they're working with all of those school districts, but they do have routes that can get to most of them. And one of the areas of the state that historically had been underserved by the Food Hub network is that sort of Addison, Rutland, Bennington County corridor. And there are two emerging food hubs in that region, Acorn, Vermont, and the Vermont Farmers Food Center. Acorn in Addison County and the Vermont Farmers Food Center in Rutland County are expanding their efforts and are newly going to be able to serve some of the school districts in those areas. And Food Connects is opening up a route into Bennington County finally. So it's getting better. It's not perfect yet, but it's a lot better than it was a few years ago. And then the last area, or the last method that schools use for purchasing typically is a broadline distributor. And in most cases, that's going to be Performance Food Group, which now owns Reinhart, if you're familiar with them. And they do offer some qualifying Vermont local products through that catalog as well. So schools are able to purchase some local products through that broadline distributor that serves them already. So I don't know if that answers your question or not. Yeah.
Performance Food Group owns Reinhart, which owns Black River.
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and they would presumably serve the entire state.
Yes, they do serve the entire state. Yeah.
A sense of how big, how important they might be in what we're talking about here.
Yeah, they've been good partners to work with in this, and they definitely have a role to play. Absolutely. One of the challenges any broadline distributor is going to face is, their systems aren't set up for source identifying local products. They may offer carrots on any given week, and they could come from New York State, they could come from California, or they could come from Vermont, depending on seasonality, depending on what's going on in their warehouse. So we have been working with them, and processed products are actually a little bit easier because those come from a particular business that is, always around. So we've been working with them and identifying, looking at their catalogs. They are working, hopefully, it's been sort of a slow process to be able to better identify for school nutrition directors which products do meet the Vermont local definition. But that has been a bit of a long process. And so the challenge is always going to be around those fresh produce items, things like that, keeping track of where they're coming from. And that's really where the direct purchasing relationships, if you're buying direct from that farmer, you know exactly where they're located and whether they meet the definition or not. And similarly, the food hubs, they are able to source identify all of their products and have that transparent supply chain from start to finish. So schools can get a report. Every product that the food hubs sell do not necessarily qualify for Vermont local, but the sales reps in those food hubs are well versed in the local definition. They can pull reports for their customers saying, this is everything you purchased. these were your Vermont local products from within everything you purchased. Reinhardt PFG is also starting to deliver those reports for schools as well, although we're still working with them on clarifying some things that may or may not be official in terms of whether they meet the definition. So that's been an ongoing process, but it's getting much better.
Representative O'Brien.
Not necessarily connected to universal school meals, but local food for sure. You must know, Helen, are there impediments to just schools or school food authorities to having livestock on campus? Like every school.
Yeah, so I was gonna say there are definitely schools that raise chickens. It's often for educational purposes, much more than food production purposes. Of course, there's some eggs that may make their way into the cafeteria here and there, but it's largely for educational purposes. There have been, I believe that one of the tech centers used to have I'm reaching back into history here, so I don't want to go too far. I'm not aware of any schools that are raising beef or anything like that currently. So, and that does feel a little bit beyond the scope of what we might ask our schools to take on.
But AAB or
Well, so
having issues with this or liability issues or.
So that I don't know. I could look into that. I'm not certain if there's a law against this or any rules within USDA. I may consult with my colleagues at AOE and the Agency of Ag, honestly, before answering that one. So I'm not certain. My sense is that, knowing that schools do raise some chickens, it is possible,
Right.
But there would be a lot of considerations before expanding a program beyond that. One thing to note that may be of interest is that the local foods incentive currently does allow for school garden produce to count towards their local foods incentive. And so what that process would entail is whoever's in charge of the school garden, sometimes it's a teacher, sometimes it's, the PTA or some combination, they would take note of the fair market value of those products and document that and sort of issue a receipt from the school nutrition program so they can document how much the value of that food was. So that's wonderful. That's been a nice, but most schools, again, are not doing production farming on campus, and nor would we really want to ask them to do that at this stage. And there's plenty of farmers out there that could use the business and have maybe some better systems developed than. But yeah, they can and they do use their school garden produce in the program. So that's nice.
I'm thinking of, I think, 3 questions that came up that might be helpful to get your perspective on.
Sure.
One is when it has to do with the definition of local that we're using anyway in this particular section of statute that might be unintentionally harming the effort here, and particularly with meat processing. So if the animal is raised in Vermont, but we don't have the capacity, or maybe it's a question of convenience to go just over the state line.
Right.
Then it comes back. Right now, I think that doesn't qualify as local.
Yeah, there's been a lot of back and forth around this in particular. If it's all right, I will get back to you with a more detailed and confirmed response about this. But yes, there is a number of situations where a school is working with a beef producer that raises the cows here in Vermont, has to send them over to New Hampshire or a neighboring state for slaughter and processing, and then returns. They kind of store the product on their farm and then sell it to a school. So we've been trying to figure out if that counts. We would really like to see a situation like that count towards qualifying for the local foods incentive, because as I'm sure you all are very well aware, processing is a big bottleneck here in Vermont. But let me get back to you with a more specific response. There's a couple of instances I'm thinking about, and I just don't want to lead you astray. I'm trying to remember exactly what the resolution was to those off the top of my head, and I just can't recall right in this moment.
And then a second involves the situation where the school food authority has a contract with a vendor to manage the program. and whether the incentives are aligned correctly there
Right.
for the management company to pursue local product if they're not gonna, because they have a long-term contract and may not see the 15 cents. Whether that's deterring anybody from
Yeah,
our local product.
this may be a deterrent that we will see in, the current year and the coming couple of years. And this was sort of an unintended consequence of the way the program is designed at the SFA level. The grant award, if you achieve it, gets distributed to the SFA. And again, this is me trying not to step into Agency of Education territory here, but I'll just relay what my understanding of the situation is. That by law in Vermont, food service management company contracts are required to be fixed price. So they negotiate, the school district or the SFA negotiates with the management company a price per plate that they'll get reimbursed. Most of those contracts were negotiated at a rate that didn't take into effect or take into consideration additional costs of local food purchasing. Those contracts, in order to qualify for the local foods incentive, the Agency of Education deemed that wasn't enough of a reason to go renegotiate the contract mid-contract. So if it's a 3-year contract and a year and a half in, this local foods incentive pops up, that's not sort of grounds to go renegotiate the contract according to them. But Connor, who you met last week, has developed template language that goes into all of the documents that schools are sending out to rebid their food service management company contracts. So over the coming years, as all of those contracts come up for renewal, we anticipate that all of them will adopt that language or some variation on that language and encourage a conversation of what understanding of what the actual true cost will be and negotiate the new rate with the expectation of we'll achieve 15% local purchasing on your behalf or what have you. So those conversations will happen at that level in the coming years. So that's my understanding of the situation.
So is the belief that the food service management company would have a pretty good sense of whether it could hit 15 cents, would agree to?
Yeah, and in particular, we have worked for years with the Abbey Group on many initiatives, and they're very supportive of this program. And they're one of the local companies that has been raising this issue, and rightfully so. This is an opportunity that they're being asked by their SFA to go out and help them achieve this grant, and they're the ones making the purchasing decisions and paying the bills without necessarily seeing the increased reimbursement themselves. So that has definitely been a challenge. And we'd like to see them renegotiate those contracts moving forward to include this so that all parties feel like it's fair and just and the resources are well distributed. So
we've got a couple more minutes. Anybody else has questions? Anything else that you thought that you didn't think earlier that you want to add?
Well, let's see. I could go down lots of different rabbit holes with you, but I think that's the big one. One of the challenges that we do hear quite frequently from school nutrition programs in implementation is related to the definition of local that we're using. And it's, just the recognition that we're a very small state and 12 of our 14 counties are border counties. A number of these schools already had pre-existing purchasing relationships with farm partners right across the river in New Hampshire, for example, or across the lake in New York and Massachusetts as well. And that's been a challenge. What we have seen, unfortunately, is some of those producers getting dropped in favor of other Vermont producers that may be even further away from the physical school district. But because of the design, because of the nature of the definition being very Vermont specific, that is sort of the collateral damage of that. So I just wanted to make you all aware. We don't have hard and fast data about the economic impact on our neighbors, but it's something that we're aware of. We know it's been a challenge, and it effectively works against a school to purchase a New Hampshire or Massachusetts product versus finding a comparable Vermont product. Because it just gets factored into that everything else purchases from the other 49 states and the rest of the world. So that's one challenge that, and at the same time, we certainly understand that these are Vermont taxpayer dollars that we're stewarding here, and certainly have our Vermont producers' interests at heart and wanting to make sure this program supports them. So just sharing that as some added context.
Representative Lipsky.
It's really a follow-up, David, on your question. And there's this example of Bellows Falls, and there's an egg producer that's 4 miles or 3 miles across the river.
Yep.
There was discussion about having Vermont local be able to expand
Yeah.
distance from the political boundary between
Yeah.
the states.
So
Does that have any traction or?
yeah, I think there'd be a number of school nutrition directors that'd be very happy to hear that. I think just to scale back a little bit, the definition that is used in the statute is the definition that the Agency of Agriculture and the Attorney General's office worked together to develop. And that was just adapted, I want to say the work was really done in 2019 and went into effect in 2020, although I could be off on my timeline a little bit. And I wouldn't suggest that we try to amend that definition, because that definition was designed with an entirely different purpose in mind than this local foods incentive program. What we did, or what was done when the legislation was moving its way through the process in 2021, when we got to that point, it was determined a definition would be quite helpful in a program like this. And we said, oh, well, look, there's one right there. The Agency of Agriculture definition exists. Let's use that. It's imperfect for this program. So this program is having to sort of adapt to some of those difficult situations, like not being able to, or it's not that you're not able to, but disincentivizing purchasing from the egg vendor 2 miles into the neighboring state. So potentially, if you wanted to consider any changes, and again, this is probably something you'd need to work on with Ledge Council, but maybe there could be, we're using this definition and here are a few exceptions or additions that are acceptable for the purposes of this program, obviously not trying to change the bigger picture.
Couple more questions maybe, and then we'll have to move on. Representative Rice?
I was just gonna suggest and suggest with openness for
Yeah.
if you have comment on it, it's like perhaps an answer, a compromise is that an exception would be that schools can count local products that are the result of direct relationships. And so
From neighboring
if
states.
it's coming through a distributor and it's from Massachusetts, maybe that wouldn't count. But if there's a relationship with a farmer from a neighboring state and it's a direct purchase, then maybe that's the.
Yeah, I think that's a very reasonable accommodation to consider. I think that schools would be happy with that, because typically these are those relationships that they had, that personal direct purchase relationship for years. I know actually Maureen O'Neill from Bennington Schools has a number of direct purchasing relationships just over the border in New York State that she's been working with for years, and has been really kind of struggling with that, the implications of that. So, she's one person I know that'd be happy to hear a solution like that, and many others.
Representative Cole, did you have a question? Did you have your hand up? No. Representative O'Brien?
Right, the Battle of Bennington wasn't a local battle, it was fought in New York State.
Very true. Very true. Yes.
I just wondered, on the grants for buying local food, not this 15, 20, 25, but the grant where you can actually buy a certain amount of local food. How does that work with nutrition directors and say you have a contract with a service provider?
Yeah. Let me just clarify, I understand what you're referring to. Are you referring to the grants that are administered through the Agency of Agriculture? Yeah, so typically those grants, while food is an allowable expense, it typically doesn't make up the majority of their budgets.
Right.
Yeah, but so that those products, if they're used in the school meals program, theoretically could count. Typically what they'll spend those funds on would be infrastructure improvements, equipment, gardening supplies, curriculum, professional learning for teachers, expenses like that. And if they do purchase food, with those funds to go into the meal program that would count towards the local foods incentive. Is that what you're asking, or did I miss the mark? I'm sorry if I did.
Some of that, but I'm thinking more if the school, say, is contracted with the Abbey Group, you know, to provide, I mean, the Abbey Group
Oh, yeah.
has to provide a certain
Sure,
plate at a certain price.
right.
And they're working with the SFA's nutrition director.
Yep.
That says, hey, I got a grant to go buy 500 pounds of beef from a local.
Yes.
Is that working? I mean, because in some ways you think that the
Yeah.
Abbey Group would be happy because they don't have to
Right.
buy them.
Yeah. That's a great question. And I can't think of a specific example of that happening. Typically, when a school that works with a food service management company applies for one of these farm to school and early childhood grants with the Agency of Agriculture, usually someone from the school nutrition team from the Abbey Group is kind of on their team, working with them. And would welcome that. I can't think of a very specific example of that happening, though. It must, I'm sure it does. But those tend to be that's a one-time grant. So it's usually for a special event that they may make those orders. But yeah, that's typically how that happens when they're spending money from those grants on food. They're working with the food service, whether it's a management company or if it's an independently in-house managed program or not. That relationship exists, and most people are ordering food through the school nutrition program. They have a way of separating what are expenses related to the school nutrition programs, the federal programs, and then what are catering or special event expenses. So this may fall into one or the other, depending on what the activities are. So if that makes more sense, I'm not sure if I zeroed in exactly on what you were looking for, but hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, it's funny that this committee changed the definition to Vermont only. So now it's coming back.
Well, sure. Yeah, and I think that makes sense with the goals that you had for doing so. And then this program came along afterwards. And we knew it was going to be imperfect, but and now we're kind of seeing some of those challenges show up in real life. But again, I think most people recognize the spirit of the program, and they believe in it, and they're wanting to invest in Vermont farmers, but hoping to not have to do so completely at the expense of these pre-existing direct purchase relationships. I think that's a good way to distinguish it.
And is there a place where we could redefine local just when it applies to schools?
Yeah, we could, and I think if we're gonna make any changes, once we've seen Act 67 today, we can think about, is there anything that we might want to change, and other things beyond possibly what we've just talked about. And we could put them into, and I think the thought is attach them onto the universal school meals bill. Just because we have it same, more or less sort of the same concept, so.
So there's one more thing I did think of, if I have time, but if not, that's
Got
okay.
another witness waiting, so.
Okay.
If you just wanna sort of state it, print it out,
Sure.
and then we can follow up later.
That sounds great.
Yeah, just
So-
get it on the table.
Just noting that you're going to be going through the language this afternoon, you'll probably notice that there is a reference to the exclusion of fluid milk in this program. We get a lot of questions about this. It's something I'm very happy to speak to. I can give the really quick a summary of why that is. Obviously, we're in a dairy state. Certainly, we're looking for all kinds of any and every way that we can support dairy farmers, especially organic farmers right now. This exists for a couple of reasons. The main one being that there simply is no product that schools use that meets their specifications that could also meet the Vermont local definition. 99.9% of schools purchase their milk from Hood, if not all of them. And that product is aggregated from dairies in multiple states and processed in their facility in Agawam, Massachusetts, and then trucked back here. So it simply doesn't meet the definition.
So it wouldn't
We don't want schools to be penalized for
It
that.
would be fair to include that.
Yeah.
Yeah, sort of in the denominator. Some of the milk potentially is coming from Vermont.
Yes.
But
We just don't have a verifiable way of knowing what percentage that is, and it's likely not more than 50%, which is what the definition would require. It would additionally require the processing to happen here, which also we don't have capacity for. So just wanted to clarify that. I'm sure that question will come
Yeah,
up, so.
Thank you for mentioning that, because we hadn't talked about that. I think we knew that it was there, but hadn't talked about why, so.
Yeah, and should the processing capability come online someday, that's something we'd be happy to come back to the committee and discuss the re-inclusion of fluid milk and how that really can help to move the needle and keep even more money right here in Vermont. But that simply doesn't exist today, so.
Well, Alan, thank you for coming back, and
My pleasure.
I know we got started late, so thank you.
No problem.
For your participation. I think we've got Rosie Kruger from